The very first thing I am going to say, and this is directed at anyone who is newly qualified, curb your enthusiasm a little bit. Hey everyone, I am back again in your faces this week. How is everyone going? If you're just joining for the first time and you've never met me before, my name is Chioma. Welcome to my channel. Make yourself comfortable. We're getting started immediately. So this video is inspired by a comment I received under one of my recent videos. Actually, it was a question. And this person said they wanted to know how, as a social worker, I am able to keep the professional separate from the private, okay, or separate from the personal. And I felt that was a really great question to ask. This video is inspired by that comment, but I'm not only going to address the specific aspect in that question. I want to go a little further and just talk generally about your well-being as a social worker and how to support your well-being such that you don't burn out too quickly. Some of you may already know, but if you didn't, I am telling you now that social work is unfortunately a profession that has a high turnover rate. People up and leave all the time. And the reasons would usually be surrounded around vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, or burnout, okay? A lot of social workers end up becoming really burnt out. And it is so significant in the social work profession because, as you would know, it is a profession that sits very squarely in the intersection between social issues and human behavior and human emotions. Okay, so these two things intersect to create a storm that can very easily reach into your private life, reach into your mental well-being. And before you know it, if you do not have a structure in place to support your well-being, you could potentially be experiencing all these things that I mentioned around compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, or burnout. It is also interesting to note that some social workers have ended up with significant mental health issues like PTSD just from exposure to trauma in practice. Also, when I have spoken to a lot of people in the helping professions, not just social workers, but I'm talking about people like counselors, psychologists, anyone within a profession that deals with human vulnerabilities, whether in a medical sense, in a physical sense, allied health sense. You ask them what inspired them to take up that career. It is usually born out of some kind of experience that might have happened to them personally or happened to someone close to them, maybe a friend or a relative or someone else. And off of that experience, they have decided, okay, I am going to take this up as a career because I want to help other people. Why I brought this up is because there is such an emotional aspect to it. It can be a fulfilling job, but I feel like the same things that make it fulfilling are the same things that pose a risk to the practitioners. It is hard to be dealing with other people's emotions every day without your own emotions kind of getting in the mix every once in a while, because the stories you hear are very human stories. You will be able to locate yourself or someone you know from your family or a friend in those stories. So even though the person sitting across from you is a complete stranger, it hits close to home. For instance, for me, I work in the domestic violence, sexual violence space. And when someone is talking to me about getting bullied and harassment of any kind, whether it is general harassment or maybe sexual harassment, sometimes I can place myself in those stories. Sometimes I can place my children in there, other family members or other friends in those stories. The very first thing I am going to say, and this is directed at anyone who is looking to becoming a social worker or anyone who is newly qualified. At the beginning of practice, you go into the profession with so much passion because you have all these ideas about how you want to make a difference. You still have that emotional energy and vibrance going into the profession. You feel very strongly about your values and what you're bringing to the table as a social worker. You just want to go out there and tackle the social injustices that you see every day. What you may not realize is that your practice is going to be set within the context of several boundaries and restrictions. Restrictions from the organization that you work in, restrictions from the wider societal context, and this might be in the form of legislation, it might be in the form of other practice guidelines. Here in Australia, we've got the Australian Association of Social Workers, and they have set out guidelines for practice, code of ethics that as a social worker you must keep to. all these things can intersect in a way that makes you feel frustrated sometimes with yourself as a social worker, frustrated mostly with the system. That is one thing that I hear a lot of social workers and, other people in the helping professions talk about. Just the bureaucratic bottlenecks that surround your practice and which will kind of curb your enthusiasm a little bit. Have you seen that series, Curb Your Enthusiasm? Anyways, at the point where you are starting your practice as a social worker, you may not have any insight into these things. There will be times when you just need to accept that things are beyond your control and let it go. And that will be very hard, I must tell you this. In those situations when you let things go, even though you would have preferred a different outcome, you need to have some kind of strategy around how you're going to manage your own emotions in that time. Otherwise, you will find yourself taking things home. You will find yourself still mulling over things in your downtime when you're supposed to be resting, spending time with your family. Picture you waking up refreshed, ready to take on the world. You go into work. Your first client presents with bodily injuries. This would be the very first time that they've spoken to a professional about the abusive relationship they've been in. And the only reason they are in front of you in the first place is because another friend has encouraged them, finally been able to get them through the door to seek professional help for the very first time. And they are coming to you presenting with bodily injuries. They have a black eye, and they are describing other injuries located on different parts of their body. That's your first client of the day. Now, after providing psychoeducation, safety planning, doing all your risk assessments, you can tell that this client is in grave danger. And judging from the pattern of escalation of the violence against them, you know that going back to that relationship is a bad idea. But guess what? Your client is not ready to leave. And despite everything you say to them, all the support that you're willing to provide them to leave that relationship, they're just not ready to leave. You're already frustrated by that. Second client comes in and they tell you that they have recently experienced an SA. I'm going to leave what SA means on top of the screen. That experience of SA has triggered other traumatic memory and other traumatic impacts. Your client is now not sleeping well, not eating well. They've fallen sick as a result, have not been able to attend classes, have not been able to attend work. And so you're looking at someone who is physically sick, mentally unwell. They've lost their income. They're falling behind on their studies. There's just too many impacts. And then when you try to see what is available in terms of support for this client, you find out that because of their residency status, they are not eligible for a lot of things. So by the time your second client is leaving your office, you become frustrated with the system because your clients, even though they are suffering so much, there's only so much you can do. And then you get called into this meeting with top management and they are wanting to implement this thing that you don't see how it is going to improve your work. And even though you try to express your concerns about it, it's like nobody is listening. Maybe a few other work colleagues are on your side, but because this decision goes even beyond your line manager or your direct supervisor, and it's something that you really do not have any control over, you sit in that systemic frustration. So I am just trying to give you a picture of all the things that will intersect with your practice and take things out of your control, which is why you need to be very intentional and conscious about looking after yourself. If you start off by conserving your energy, approach practice as if it were a marathon and not a sprint. It might not seem to you like you're making much of an impact in your day-to-day, but as they say, you should aim for incremental impact. Little steps over time make a huge impact. So that's one thing that I have kept in mind when it comes to maintaining my well-being, but also keeping the professional separate from the personal. If there is nothing else you remember that when you bring work home with you, when I talk about bringing work home, I'm not saying it just in the literal sense of actually bringing your laptop home, bringing back paperwork to continue to work from home. I am talking about when you carry it with you emotionally and mentally and you bring it back home. Remember that you're not getting paid in that time. In your personal time, you're not getting paid to be dealing with other people's traumas and problems. Yeah. And it doesn't make you a bad person when you say, okay, I am at the end of my day. I can revisit this tomorrow, but for now, I am not going to think about it. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to go home to my own family. First of all, you want to be well as a social worker to be able to help other people. You know the whole concept of putting on your own mask first before helping other people. That's exactly what it is in social work. If you're not looking after yourself, it means you're not bringing your best self to the clients, which is unfair to them. Remember that clients are coming to you when they are at their most vulnerable. Nobody is coming to you as a social worker when they are about to throw a party. They are coming to you when things are going south. You owe it to them and you owe it to yourself to show up as your best self every day. Which is why if you feel unwell, please take leave and go and rest. I know that not every organization has a robust leave policy around mental health and mental well-being, which should not be, especially in these sorts of professions. I personally feel like every organization should have a proactive stance around maintaining the well-being of their staff. But that is a topic for another day. I don't want to digress. One thing that I say also is, if you have decided to be a social worker, think very carefully about what field of practice you want to be in, because not every field of practice will suit you. Not everybody is suited to work in drug and alcohol, with addictions, gambling. Not everybody is suited to working with women and children escaping domestic violence. Not every social worker is equipped to work in a hospital environment, okay? Don't just accept the first job that comes your way. Actually, you should be very conscious and intentional about the kind of jobs you apply for in the first place. Don't do it out of desperation, because you might go in there, have a bad experience, and that bad experience will just stop you from wanting to even continue in the profession. So think very carefully about that. I have touched a little bit on organizational policies. Yes, I have spoken about the part where they can frustrate you sometimes, but you can also think about organizational policies from the sense of protection, protecting you as the practitioner and also protecting the client. So a lot of organizations would have policies around accepting gifts from clients, because that has the potential to muddle up those lines between professional and personal. A lot of organizations will give you office equipment, including phones, so that you're not taking client calls on your personal phone. And you would think that this is not even a point worth mentioning, but let me tell you, without mentioning names or going into any details, I was once in a work environment where I was expected to use my personal phone for client work. And what I am just saying is that that is not ideal for several reasons. But yeah, most organizations that I have been in, apart from that one peculiar case, would provide you with your own work phone so that you keep things separate. Don't do anything personal on your work phone, and don't do anything professional on your personal phone. Policies around dating your client, of course, that's a no-no. You should not be sleeping with your client or dating your client. You should not be attending certain social events, except, of course, it's been organizationally sanctioned. That's fine. But if a client is inviting you over to their bachelor party or bachelorette party, that's a no-no. Draw the line there. Another thing that you must take really seriously is supervision. Supervision, the way I see it, is counseling for you. It is focused on your well-being during practice. So anything you've experienced during practice, for instance, complex case situations, other situations that you've not felt very comfortable raising with your manager at work or your supervisor at work or even your colleagues at work, you can bring them into your external supervision. It could also be things like ethical dilemmas in practice. Dilemmas that maybe involve yourself and the organization you work with. Like I said, things that you might not be readily comfortable to disclose to someone else working in the same organization or the same position as yourself. You can take it to supervision. Please use it wisely. Supervision is not something that you just do as a tick box activity. Make sure that if something is eating away at you, take it to supervision and have someone help you to figure it out. Supervision is also one other way for you to improve your experience, which is why you should be really careful when you choose an external supervisor. Go with someone who is experienced not just from the practice perspective, but also experienced in helping other people navigate practice. Another thing that I have found to be really helpful is continuous professional development. Improving your skill ultimately helps you to build resilience. And when you build resilience, it means that you're not so impacted. Another thing I'm going to talk about is setting boundaries from work. A lot of times when we talk about boundary setting in practice, the default thinking is setting boundaries with your client. That's a very basic point, right? I don't need to hammer on about that. But there is also setting boundaries with your colleagues to manage your own capacity. And this is where sometimes it gets a little difficult because it requires good communication. It requires you communicating your needs and communicating what areas you need support in. People tend to shy away from this because there's the tendency to think that when you communicate the limits to your capacity, then it is you admitting somehow that you're incompetent and that you can't really handle things. So which is better between this scenario that you say yes to everything and end up not doing any of it properly, and you actually communicating your capacity limits, communicating your needs, just making sure that everyone is on the same page, and so that when work is coming to you, it is coming to you on the basis that your capacity is understood. Try to communicate your needs. That way you're not ending up with more than you can carry, and which ultimately will impact your well-being. Now, what I want to talk about is in relation to developing a professional relationship and maintaining that relationship with your clients. Some of the things that I have found helpful personally to keep the professional separate from the personal is, first of all, to see myself not as an expert, but as a facilitator. It is important to me to always keep the understanding that every client in front of me is unique in their own experience. Every client in front of me has, in one way or the other, demonstrated resilience and demonstrated capacity and an ability to keep themselves safe. Yes, it can be very confronting when someone comes to you and they are presenting with bodily injuries. It's very easy to slip into problem solving, I am your savior mode. You just want to start prescribing things. Oh, you should report to the police. You should call this service. You should be packing your things up and leaving. How are your kids? We should be making a mandatory report. Yes, you could be slipping into that very easily because the presentation in front of you is confronting. But if you took the time, first of all, to regulate your own emotions, and that is something that is super important as a social worker, that you learn self-regulation. So take a moment to regulate your own emotions. Take a moment to acknowledge the uniqueness of the situation in front of you, but also acknowledge the uniqueness of the client in how they've been able to manage to stay safe for as long as they have before they came to meet you. And yes, when a client talks to you about the ways that they have kept themselves safe or the ways that they have managed their own well-being, it might not sound completely all right to you, but that's why I said you're a facilitator, you're not an expert. Let me give you a very real instance. I have had clients who would say, oh, the reason I haven't left this abusive relationship, even though it does get really bad to the extent where sometimes, I've ended up in hospital, but the reason I have not left is because when I am in the same house with this person, at least I can predict their movements. Now, if I were to leave, I don't know what they are planning behind me. I will not be able to see it coming. So I am better off and I am safer being under the same roof with this person, because then I can gauge their behaviors, I can gauge their moods, and engaging their moods, I know exactly what to do to keep myself safe. And that is how the client is demonstrating to you that they're bringing some knowledge and some insight into how they keep themselves safe. You better be listening as a social worker. Now, it might not sound right to you as the practitioner, and to you as anybody else who is standing outside looking in, the solution might be very clear-cut. Pack your things and leave. That might be the solution to you, very black and white. But by the time you speak to a client and understand context, understand nuance, even if you do not agree, it is in your client's best interest that you're not dismissing them as if they had no knowledge, no wisdom. I will never know better than them what they are experiencing, how they are feeling. And it is actually a disservice to them and myself to assume the role of a know-all, because then I might be setting myself up to an expectation that even I cannot meet. It helps me to regulate myself, and it also helps me to define what my role is within that therapeutic relationship. Does it make sense? Such that I am not taking on more than I should be carrying. So the last thing I'm going to say is, please let me know in the comment section if you are in a helping profession. So this is not just for social workers. If you're in any kind of helping profession where you're dealing with human vulnerabilities, emotions, behaviors, or health, mental health, please leave in the comment section how you manage your well-being as a practitioner and how you keep things separate, professional versus private. How do you keep it separate? How do you make sure that, like my supervisor said, you're not a candle that burns out too quickly because you burn too brightly? Let me know in the comment section. And on that note, people, don't forget to like this video before you go. I'll see you again in my next one. Bye-bye.